For decades, Afghanistan has been isolated, locked behind mountains, ravaged by conflict, and cut off from global trade networks. But that reality may be about to change. Recently, China and Pakistan made a significant announcement. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a massive $62 billion infrastructure initiative, will expand beyond its original borders to include Afghanistan and potentially reach deeper into Central Asia. This development could fundamentally alter Afghanistan's trajectory. Through this ambitious project, a railway system is planned to link Pakistan's strategic Gwadar port with Afghan territory. For a landlocked nation that has endured more than 4 decades of continuous warfare, this represents something extraordinary, a tangible connection to international waters and global markets. But not everyone views this expansion positively. India, in particular, has expressed serious concerns, even attempting to obstruct the plan by pointing to potential security threats. Delhi understands the strategic implications all too well. When China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan form closer economic ties, they create a formidable northern bloc that could challenge India's traditional dominance across South Asia. So what does this mean for the region? What concrete opportunities could this corridor create for Afghanistan? And what challenges might India confront as this new economic architecture takes shape? Today, we're going to explore these questions in depth, examining the geopolitical chess game unfolding across one of the world's most volatile regions. The origins of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, commonly known as CPEC, are essential to understanding where we're headed. So let's take a quick step back. CPEC represents one of the flagship projects under China's Belt and Road Initiative, that massive global infrastructure program designed to enhance connectivity between Asia, Europe, Africa, and beyond. The concept first emerged in 2013, during a period when China was actively seeking new pathways to secure its economic interests and energy supplies. 2 years later, in 2015, the project officially launched with remarkable ambition. China and Pakistan signed 51 separate cooperation agreements in a single stroke, committing to investments totaling $62 billion, an astronomical figure, especially for Pakistan's economy at the time. The implementation strategy was divided into distinct phases. The initial stage, running from 2015 through 2020, concentrated on fundamental infrastructure improvements throughout Pakistan. This meant constructing new power generation facilities to address Pakistan's chronic electricity shortages, building modern highway systems to connect major cities, and overhauling transportation networks that had deteriorated over decades of underinvestment. The second phase, which began in 2020 and continues today, has shifted focus toward industrial development and deeper economic integration. Rather than just building roads and power plants, the emphasis now centers on establishing special economic zones, fostering manufacturing partnerships, and creating sustainable industrial clusters that can generate employment and economic growth. But here's what makes this project truly significant for China. It's not merely about helping a strategic partner develop its economy. The corridor provides China with something it desperately needs: direct land access to the Indian Ocean. Consider China's geographic challenge. The country's massive export economy relies heavily on maritime shipping, but almost all of that maritime traffic must follow a single vulnerable route. Container vessels departing from China's eastern ports, Shanghai, Ningbo, Shenzhen, must travel thousands of kilometers southward, passing through the Strait of Malacca before finally entering the Indian Ocean and continuing to markets in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. The Strait of Malacca is one of the world's most critical and most precarious maritime choke points. This narrow waterway between Malaysia and Indonesia handles roughly 1/4 of all global traded goods. It's perpetually congested, navigationally challenging, and strategically vulnerable. More concerning for Beijing, it lies within the sphere of American naval influence, with the United States maintaining substantial military presence throughout Southeast Asia. Here's the stark reality: Approximately 80% of China's crude oil imports pass through the Strait of Malacca. If this passage were somehow disrupted, whether through military blockade during a conflict, piracy, or even a major maritime accident, China's energy security would face catastrophic consequences. The Chinese government and strategic planners refer to this vulnerability as the Malacca Dilemma, and it has shaped Chinese foreign policy for years. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor offers an elegant solution to this problem. Under this arrangement, energy resources and commercial goods can travel by rail and road from China's western Xinjiang region, move overland through Pakistani territory, and finally reach the Arabian Sea through Gwadar Port. This land-based alternative route eliminates thousands of kilometers of vulnerable ocean transit and provides China with a backup option that doesn't depend on narrow straits or distant naval passages. This brings us to the latest development that's captured international attention. In May of this year, representatives from China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan convened in Beijing for high-level discussions. The outcome was significant. All three parties agreed to extend the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor framework into Afghan territory. The conversations covered multiple dimensions of potential cooperation: infrastructure development, energy sector partnerships, expanded trade relationships, and various other economic sectors. But the central theme remained consistent throughout: integrating Afghanistan into the corridor network and using it as a platform to eventually connect with the wider Central Asian region. Now, you might be wondering, and it's a reasonable question, why would China want to include Afghanistan in this ambitious project? After all, Afghanistan has one of the world's weakest economies, virtually non-existent infrastructure in many areas, and a recent history marked by political instability and violence. From a conventional business perspective, it seems like a risky partner at best. But geography reveals the answer. If you examine a map of the region, Afghanistan's strategic importance becomes immediately obvious. Along the entire overland route stretching from China through Central Asia toward the Middle East and eventually to the Arabian Sea, Afghanistan occupies a critical position that simply cannot be bypassed. Regardless of its internal challenges, Afghanistan sits at the crossroads between Central and South Asia. It shares borders with Pakistan to the east and south, Iran to the west, and China through the narrow Wakhan corridor to the northeast. This geographic reality makes Afghanistan one of China's most important potential gateways to the Middle East. That Wakhan corridor deserves special mention. It's a thin strip of mountainous territory in northeastern Afghanistan, extending about 350 kilometers and rarely more than 20 kilometers wide. The terrain is extraordinarily rugged. High-altitude passes, sparse population, harsh weather conditions. From a purely logistical standpoint, it's not an easy route for commerce. But from a geopolitical perspective, it's invaluable. This corridor represents a direct land connection between China and Afghanistan, and by extension between China and South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East. For cities in western China, particularly in Xinjiang province, this connection offers a potential outlet to the outside world that doesn't require traveling thousands of kilometers eastward to coastal ports. For China, there's another crucial dimension to consider: security. The stability and prosperity of Xinjiang are matters of paramount importance to Beijing. The region has faced significant challenges related to extremism and separatist movements, and Afghanistan's situation directly impacts Xinjiang's security environment. Afghanistan has unfortunately been one of the world's most active centers for terrorist organizations and extremist networks for decades. Groups operating from Afghan territory have connections and influence that extend well beyond national borders. If Afghanistan remains unstable, fragmented, and under the influence of extremist elements, the spillover effects inevitably reach neighboring regions, including China's western provinces. From Beijing's perspective, the choice is clear: Either watch from the sidelines as Afghanistan potentially descends further into chaos and becomes a haven for groups that could threaten Chinese interests, or proactively engage with Afghanistan through economic development initiatives that might help stabilize the country. China has chosen engagement. By bringing Afghanistan into the Belt and Road framework through the CPEC extension, China aims to help develop the country's infrastructure, create economic opportunities, and gradually integrate Afghanistan into regional trade networks. The theory, and it's one that underpins much of China's Belt and Road strategy, is that economic development and connectivity reduce instability and create stakeholders with vested interests in maintaining peace. What Afghanistan stands to gain. So what concrete benefits could Afghanistan actually receive from joining the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor? To answer this question, it's worth looking at what the corridor has already accomplished in Pakistan. When CPEC first launched, numerous Western media outlets expressed skepticism. Critics questioned whether this infrastructure initiative would deliver meaningful improvements, or whether it represented a debt trap that would leave Pakistan worse off. Nearly a decade later, the results speak for themselves. Pakistan now operates several new power plants that have significantly reduced the chronic electricity shortages that once plagued major cities and industrial zones. The country has developed an improved highway network connecting its major urban centers. Special economic zones have been established where local and international companies operate manufacturing facilities. These aren't theoretical promises. They're tangible infrastructure and industrial assets that are actively functioning. A similar transformation could potentially unfold in Afghanistan, though the starting conditions are admittedly more challenging. Consider Afghanistan's fundamental economic constraint: it's landlocked. Every single item that Afghanistan exports to international markets must travel overland through neighboring countries. There's no Afghan seaport, no direct maritime access whatsoever. Currently, Afghan traders and exporters rely on three main routes. The first goes through Pakistan to Karachi port on the Arabian Sea. However, this route has proven unreliable because relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan fluctuate dramatically. Border tensions, diplomatic disputes, and security concerns frequently disrupt this pathway, leaving Afghan exporters unable to get their goods to market. The second route goes through Iran's Chabahar port on the Gulf of Oman. This port has received some international development assistance and offers Afghanistan an alternative to Pakistani routes. However, Chabahar's growth potential has been severely limited by American sanctions on Iran, which make international companies hesitant to use the port for fear of running afoul of U.S. regulations. The third option involves routing goods through Central Asian countries, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and ultimately to ports on the Caspian Sea or through Russia. This route is relatively safer from a security standpoint, but it's logistically complex. Goods must cross multiple international borders, each with its own customs procedures, regulatory requirements, and tariff structures. The bureaucratic complexity and accumulated costs make this route expensive and time-consuming. The result of these constraints is striking. Afghanistan's logistics costs are 2 to 4 times higher than those of its neighboring countries. For a nation trying to develop its export economy, this is a crippling disadvantage. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor could change this equation entirely. If Afghanistan gains reliable access to Gwadar port through improved infrastructure, modern highways, potentially rail connections, streamlined customs procedures, the impact on logistics costs could be transformative. Lower transportation expenses would make Afghan exports more competitive in international markets. Faster, more reliable shipping would open opportunities for time-sensitive exports like agricultural products. Afghanistan's economic potential. It's worth remembering that while Afghanistan's economy remains heavily agricultural, with farming accounting for roughly 30% of the country's GDP, many Afghan products are actually high quality. Afghan nuts, particularly almonds and pistachios, are prized in international markets. Afghan fruits like pomegranates and grapes have excellent reputations. Afghan saffron is considered among the finest in the world. The problem isn't product quality, it's infrastructure and market access. Afghanistan lacks modern cold chain systems to preserve fresh produce during transport. Processing facilities are limited or non-existent, which means products must often be exported in raw form rather than as higher-value processed goods. Market access is constrained by poor transportation networks and limited trade relationships. Afghanistan certainly has aspirations for industrialization. What developing country doesn't? But the reality has been brutally challenging. Infrastructure gets built, then destroyed in conflict. Mining operations open, then forced to close due to security concerns. International companies show interest, establish operations, then withdraw when conditions deteriorate. In this environment of persistent instability, foreign investment has been scarce. Most countries and corporations simply aren't willing to commit capital and resources to a location where the business environment can change overnight. But China has proven willing to engage even in challenging environments, viewing long-term strategic relationships as more important than short-term commercial concerns. What many observers didn't anticipate was the strength of India's opposition to Afghanistan's inclusion in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Delhi has raised serious objections to this expansion, and honestly, understanding why requires examining the broader regional power dynamics. Throughout South Asia, India stands as the dominant power by virtually every measure. In 2024, India's economy reached approximately $4 trillion, making it the world's fifth largest economy. By comparison, if you combine the GDP of every other South Asian nation, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, and the Maldives, the total doesn't even reach half of India's economic output. India's military superiority is equally pronounced. The country maintains one of the world's largest standing armies, a substantial naval fleet, a growing air force, and nuclear capabilities. India's defense budget dwarfs the combined military spending of its South Asian neighbors. This dominance has allowed India to exert significant influence over regional affairs. Smaller South Asian nations often find themselves needing to consider India's positions carefully when making strategic decisions. This isn't necessarily malicious. It's simply the reality of power dynamics when one country is so much larger and stronger than its neighbors. But the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor challenges this paradigm. By bringing multiple countries together into a cooperative framework with Chinese financing and support, the corridor creates an alternative pole of influence in the region. As more countries join, first Pakistan, now potentially Afghanistan, perhaps eventually Central Asian nations, this Chinese-backed network could gradually erode India's traditional dominance and reduce Delhi's ability to set the regional agenda. India hasn't responded passively to these developments. At the G20 summit in 2023, India promoted an ambitious counter-proposal called the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, sometimes referred to as the Spice Route Initiative. The concept involves creating an alternative trade route connecting India to Europe through Middle Eastern countries, explicitly positioned as a counterweight to China's Belt and Road Initiative. The plan generated significant attention when it was announced. India, along with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the European Union, and the United States, signed a memorandum of understanding that formally launched the initiative. The stated goals were impressive: reduce transportation costs between member countries, enhance supply chain security, promote economic integration, and create an alternative to Chinese-led infrastructure projects. But, shortly after the announcement, reality intervened. The Israel-Palestine conflict, which had been relatively contained, suddenly escalated into widespread hostilities in October 2023. Following this, Houthi forces in Yemen began targeting commercial shipping in the Red Sea, turning one of the world's busiest maritime corridors into a high-risk zone. The proposed India-Middle East-Europe route would need to pass through precisely this conflict-affected region. Beyond the immediate security concerns, the initiative has faced questions about its practical viability. Throughout the announcement and subsequent discussions, fundamental details remained unclear or entirely absent. Where would the estimated hundreds of billions of dollars in funding come from? Which institutions would manage the project implementation? How would countries with complex and sometimes antagonistic relationships coordinate on shared infrastructure? Unlike the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which has concrete financing commitments, established implementation mechanisms, and visible construction projects, the India-Middle East-Europe corridor has remained largely conceptual. Critics have suggested it appears more like a political statement, a way for India to demonstrate it can offer alternatives to Chinese initiatives, rather than a serious infrastructure plan with realistic prospects for implementation. There's another fundamental reason for India's opposition to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and it touches on one of South Asia's most sensitive and enduring conflicts, the disputed territory of Kashmir. The Kashmir conflict dates back to the partition of British India in 1947. Both India and Pakistan claim the entire Kashmir region, but each controls only a portion of it. A line of control, established through UN mediation in 1949 and refined after subsequent wars, divides the territory. This line stretches approximately 770 kilometers through mountainous terrain, separating Indian-administered Kashmir from Pakistani-administered Kashmir. Multiple wars have been fought over Kashmir. The territory has been the site of countless cross-border incidents, terrorist attacks, and military confrontations. For both India and Pakistan, Kashmir represents not just strategic territory, but a matter of national identity and pride. Compromise has proven nearly impossible. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, after leaving Chinese territory, enters Kashmir, specifically the portion under Pakistani control. This includes the region Pakistan calls Gilgit-Baltistan, an area of tremendous strategic importance due to its location and its connection to China through the Karakoram Highway. From a purely administrative standpoint, this routing makes logical sense. The corridor passes through territory that Pakistan actually controls and administers. China is building infrastructure in areas where Pakistani authorities can provide security and regulatory oversight. But India sees it differently. From Delhi's perspective, any development in Kashmir, regardless of which side of the line of control, requires Indian consent because India claims sovereignty over the entire region. By building infrastructure through Pakistani-controlled Kashmir, China and Pakistan are, in India's view, implicitly treating this territory as Pakistani land, which undermines India's territorial claims. More critically, from India's strategic perspective, the corridor provides Pakistan with concrete economic benefits derived specifically from its control over parts of Kashmir. This gives Pakistan tangible reasons to maintain its current position and reduces any incentive to negotiate territorial concessions. It transforms the Kashmir dispute from a frozen conflict into an economically consequential one. For India, this is simply unacceptable. Kashmir policy is one of the few issues in Indian politics that generates near-universal consensus across party lines. No Indian government, regardless of its political orientation, can afford to appear soft on Kashmir's sovereignty claims. Given all this context, you might wonder about another dimension of this story. Why would Pakistan agree to bring Afghanistan into the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor? After all, Pakistan and Afghanistan have their own complicated relationship, marked by border tensions, accusations of harboring militant groups, and occasional military clashes. In fact, just this year, Pakistan and Afghanistan experienced renewed tensions along their shared border, the Durand Line, with security incidents and diplomatic disputes making headlines. So why would Pakistan willingly extend one of its most important economic projects into Afghan territory? The answer lies in Pakistan's own strategic calculus. For Pakistan, The situation in Afghanistan has always represented a potential security concern. The two countries share a long, porous border crossing through difficult terrain. Throughout recent decades, militant groups have used this border region to move fighters, weapons, and resources, creating persistent security challenges for Pakistan. If Afghanistan can achieve greater stability through economic development and integration into regional trade networks, that would directly benefit Pakistan's security situation. A stable, economically growing Afghanistan focused on trade and development would be far less likely to harbor groups that threaten Pakistani interests. Additionally, improving the security environment along the Afghan border would enhance the overall safety of the China-Pakistan economic corridor itself. One of the factors that makes potential investors nervous about CPEC is security risk. If the corridor's western sections, particularly those near Afghanistan, can be secured, that makes the entire project more attractive to international companies and investors. There's also the role that China can play as a mediator. By bringing both Pakistan and Afghanistan into the same economic framework, China creates opportunities to facilitate dialogue and encourage cooperation between the two countries.